When I walk in the mornings, I think each day I'm going to see something that works. But it's a very difficult restoration to know how far to take some of it. And it involves constant discussion.
So Jill, it's so wonderful to be looking at this picture with you. I'm Caroline Campbell, I'm Director of Collections and Research, and I'm the curator of this painting, which is an enormous honour.
I'm Jill Dunkerton, Senior Restorer in the Conservation Department. It's an even greater honour for me. I've adored this picture since I was a child.
This is painted by Piero della Francesca, who for me is one of the most extraordinary figures of Western art. But he produces very few paintings, and they are as remarkable for their sense of landscape, their sense of mathematics. He was a great theorist and mathematician as well, and for the sense of great peace and space there is in them. And here at the National Gallery, we remarkably have 3 pictures which span his career. So this painting was made probably for the artist himself, and certainly for his family palace. We think of Renaissance artists as being, poor, being workmen, but Piero was very prosperous and he was very, very well regarded in his hometown. He was one of the most important citizens. So it was really appropriate that he would make this type of object for himself.
It's an extraordinary feeling, the idea that he might have done this for himself, that there's no patron, that he's not having to do anything that a patron is asking. It's a deeply personal picture.
It is extraordinary when we think about these artists' lives being so long ago, but yet in the work that we do, we feel we get really close to them. What's so important about this painting in the way it's landscape setting as well, these gorgeous hills here and wonderful reflections, so typical of Piero, is that this scene of the Nativity is happening not in the Holy Land, but it's happening in the artist's own world and place.
I think we have to imagine walking along this rather dry, dusty path, and there's an old shed. You still see old sheds like that, by the way, around San Sepolcro, dry stone building. And suddenly this vision of the birth of Christ, and this vision actually comes from the visions of the 14th century Swedish mystic and saint, St. Bridget.
The Virgin Mary is kneeling in front of this stable with her son, the infant Christ, and she is supposed to be somebody who has no possessions, but in Piero's representation, she's incredibly beautifully dressed, and she's got pearls in her hair and also this wonderful jewellery round her neck. What I love as well is that this sense of the little Christ child, he's naked, he's lying there, and he's lying on his mother's robes, and they aren't just any robe, but they're made out of the most brilliant, wonderful blue pigment. And he's separate, but he's also attached to her. I think that's a sort of detail typical of this artist and the way in which he really thinks.
And the blue pigment, which is very, very expensive, lapis lazuli, natural ultramarine, he's not sparing anything for the cost of his own picture, is used so beautifully through this picture. The other thing is that Piero always paints his male figures with a completely different technique.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When you look here, I mean, how beautiful these clear, pale faces are, and then these are deliberately not.
And these have a very solid underpainting, which is missing from his men. And you actually see it in other pictures that the painters become more transparent, and they always have this much more ruddy complexion. That has been one of the things that's made them more vulnerable to the rough cleaning. And so they're never going to look the same. But in a way, that's quite a consolation to know that they shouldn't look the same, and they won't.
I think that is important to realise, because otherwise, you would want to use the visual evidence before you. But the reason he's doing that, of course, is that in Renaissance Italy, men were supposed to go outdoors and do the work, and women were supposed to stay indoors and be wonderfully perfect and pure. So that's why you get this real difference in skin colour.
The conservation history of this painting is, let's say, unfortunate. Although it has this marvellous provenance, it was in Piero's family, I think they didn't look after it very well in later generations. It seems to have been put on an altar at some point and they managed to burn it. There are 2 candle burns there in the lower part. And at some point it underwent a very ferocious cleaning, probably to remove, we still see at the edges, the remains of this very old brown varnish. And whoever took that off wasn't very careful and caused quite a lot of damage. But there were also huge problems with the wooden panel. And this painting in the 19th century even had a reputation for being in bad condition. And then the National Gallery acquired it eventually, and they cleaned it again. And when they cleaned it, it was actually photographed. And here we actually have a photograph of the condition of the painting in 1884. I think this is probably the oldest example of a conservation photograph in the collection. And we can see from this photograph, although it's not a great one, that already the painting had huge problems of condition. And we have these conservation records, which are these histories. They were only put together in the 20th century, just after the last war, but everything that's known about the conservation is put into them. But it's wonderful having this record, which goes on for volume after volume, showing the treatment. This project has taken way longer than we expected because of the pandemic, which isn't always a bad thing. That gives us a lot of time to stop and think about the right way to do things and what the best approach to this painting is. When I cleaned the picture last summer, I made a remarkable discovery. I'd always wondered why, before cleaning, this angel had a rather sort of ugly, squiffy eye and a narrow face, and why there was so much retouching on the lute. I should have guessed, because when we removed the retouching, it became clear that when the central join was rejoined in the 19th century, in order to make a clean join, they just slightly planed along either side. And in doing that, we lost a small amount of paint. Now, it's a very small amount, only just fractionally over 1 millimetre, but the consequences for a painting like this, both because this is Piero, who's the most precise of artists, but also because it was going through such an important place, through a face, through the lute, which of course should be in perspective, through the child, was very unfortunate, because there was always going to be a step. The last restorer tried to fudge it, but it's not really very successful. Almost any other painting, we would have just accepted it and said, well, this has happened. But because it was Piero and because of the effect, we started talking about whether it might be possible. We had to open that join. It never touched the original material because they were going just through the balsa wood build-up on the back from the 1940s, and then they were able to open the 19th century glue and to insert that missing, well, 1 millimetre and a few microns to recover enough space for this to work again, to be able to restore the eye of the angel and the lute and this beautiful column of drapery, and then right down to have space for the child's fingers. It was a brilliantly precise piece of panel work. There was no point in doing it if it wasn't precise, and they did it. Everything in Piero's world has to be very organised.
Yes, it has to be rather perfect. It's like a more perfected version of the real world. This is an artist who is also a mathematician. We often separate the arts from the sciences today, wrongly, and this is certainly not the way in which people thought in Piero's time. Everything is meticulously planned, and that's why in this conservation treatment we've been really keen to get every bit of Piero's original composition back, from what Jill was telling you about the face of the angel.
If you'd like to know more about the collection, then go here. And if you want to watch more about conservation, here. and we hope to see you again in a few months' time.